It was a mild day on Friday, September 21st, 2001, as Aiden Winter walked home from his IT consultancy job right in the heart of London. It was around 4 p.m., and the streets were filled with people likely eager to get home and start their weekend. The 32-year-old Aiden crossed over Tower Bridge when he saw something in the water of the River Thames. Curious, he leaned over the railing to investigate further. At first, he thought it was a barrel, but when he looked closer, he realized it was a human torso floating in the water. This is the story of Adam, also known as the torso in the Thames. The Metropolitan Police started their investigation immediately under the codename Operation Swalcliffe. The autopsy determined that the torso belonged to a black child that was approximately 5 to 7 years old. He was wearing a pair of bright orange shorts and nothing else. The head, arms, and legs had been precisely and expertly removed, and it was likely done after death. The boy's throat had been cut, but there were no other injuries. Traces of cough medicine were found in his stomach and small intestine, alongside other unknown contents which were sent off for analysis. According to pathologist Mark Heath, the body was in the water within 24 hours after death and had been in the water up to 10 days. With the help of oceanographers, the police concluded that the body was placed into the water somewhere between Chiswick and West London and the Thames Barrier in East London, an approximately 12-mile radius. Due to the large distance, the police were unable to find any CCTV that helped assist them in their investigation. Officers started calling the child Adam, so that he had a name until they could identify him. In a press conference, the commander Andy Baker said, "His name is Adam, and until we can identify him and his family, we will act as his family." They used the media to encourage witnesses or people with information to come forward. However, due to the recent attack in America on 9/11, there was limited coverage or interest in the story. Instead, the police began looking at reports of missing children to see if one of them could be Adam, but none of the children that had been reported missing matched up, and DNA ruled them out completely. The Thames was searched again, and police found 7 half-burned candles that were wrapped in a white sheet. The name Adekoya Jofola Adoye was written on the sheet and carved into the candles. The investigators looked into whether or not this could be Adam's real name. When asked about the candles, Detective Inspector Will O'Reilly said, "We know with some certainty that the candles and the sheet form part of a ritualistic ceremony. We can't say if they are connected, but at the moment we are linking them." However, they later found out that the sheets and candles were a part of a prayer done as a celebration by the parents of a man of that name, who was in New York during the September 11th attacks and had survived. They were found to have had nothing to do with the death of Adam. So the only piece of evidence that investigators had to work with was the pair of orange shorts that the child was wearing. Investigators found that the label was for a company called Kids & Company, which was made in China but sold in Woolworths in Germany and Austria. The shorts were traced back to a batch of 820 pairs in the size of ages 5 to 7, which had been sold in 320 stores around Germany. Because of Adam's connection to Germany, the Met Police began to look outside of the UK. They teamed up with the police in the Netherlands after an unidentified white girl was found dismembered on a beach in Nolde. They looked into whether there was any connection between Adam and that girl, but the girl was eventually identified as 4-year-old Rowena Rickers, and her stepfather was charged with her murder. Rowena's mother and stepfather had fled to Spain, but they were tracked down and jailed. No link to the murder of Adam was found. By the end of 2001, police were looking at the possibility of Adam's death being a result of some kind of ritual. They requested assistance from the investigative psychology unit of the South African Police Service, who specialized in serious crimes such as serial murder, rape, and cases that seemed unusual or bizarre. The unit educated the British police on muti, a South African term that is associated with healing and medicine. The word muti derives from the Zulu word for tree, umuti. The most common form of muti is potions that are made from herbs and plants to cure basic ailments, such as headaches or stomach complaints. For more complex issues, some people believe that animal parts are needed in these potions. Animals such as crocodiles, various birds, and monkeys have been used in muti in the past. However, the idea of muti has been distorted by a small number of individuals who believe that human body parts are needed to help heal people, or in some cases, give people magical powers. According to this small contingent of believers, people are born with a certain amount of luck, with young children having not used up all of their luck. According to an article by Anthony Minar in 2001, muti is used to obtain extra luck or fortune by speaking to a healer, or sangoma, who then determines what is needed. This is where muti murders are used, and young children are seen by some as being particularly potent. Body parts can be used in the foundations of new buildings to bring good fortune or buried in the soil to ensure a successful harvest. Some sangomas believe that body parts taken from live victims are more powerful as a result of their screams. After analyzing the information about Adam's case, the investigative psychology unit determined that it was likely not a muti murder because his limbs were removed, but his genitals and organs were still intact, which is uncommon in muti. The removal of limbs may have been as a result of delaying identification, rather than as a result of muti. This team put the Met Police in contact with a sangoma called Credo Mutwa to provide his insights, although some sources state that the police sought out Mutwa themselves. According to Mutwa, Adam's death was as a result of a ritual sacrifice common in West Africa, and that the use of the bright orange shorts was significant. The color was so Adam's soul could be resurrected. However, this sangoma has been widely considered a conman and a fraudster, with David Chidester in 2005 pointing out that he was universally regarded as a fraud throughout South Africa. With the information provided by the investigative psychology unit of the South African Police Service, and that of Credo Mutwa, the Met Police returned to London still considering it to be as a result of a muti murder, despite experts stating otherwise. On January 29, 2002, Dr. Hendrik Schultz traveled from South Africa to do a second post-mortem examination. Dr. Schultz concluded that the death was consistent with a muti killing. In a press conference, he stated, "It is my opinion that the nature of the discovery of the body, features of the external examination including the nature of the wounds, clothing, and mechanism of death, are consistent with those of a ritual homicide as practiced in Africa." He also concluded that Adam was likely beheaded while still alive, stating that screams of the victim are believed to strengthen the power of the muti. This cemented in the eyes of the Met Police that Adam's death was a result of a muti murder and therefore focused their efforts on South Africa. In the same press conference, a reward of £50,000 for information was offered to encourage people to come forward. In February, police asked for assistance from British criminologist Richard Hoskins, who was also an expert of African rituals. They provided him with a case file on Adam's murder and asked for his opinion. However, according to Hoskins' book, The Boy in the River, he told the police that he believed it wasn't a result of a muti murder because the cuts were too precise, and the limbs were removed after death, rather than while Adam was still alive, and his genitals and organs were still intact. Quote, "The more I look into this, the more certain I am that it isn't a South African muti murder, and if I'm right, it's likely that Adam doesn't come from there either." Unquote. Hoskins also told police that Adam being circumcised was rare in most countries in Africa, so that could help them narrow down where he was from. After further analysis, Hoskins concluded that Adam's murder was a result of a human sacrifice. Muti involved the harvesting of parts, whereas a sacrifice focused on the flowing of blood. The killers would cut the victim's throat in a precise manner, and then the blood was spilled onto the ground or an altar for a deity. In some cases, the blood was drunk out of a severed head. This suggested West Africa, where human sacrifices were illegal but more common. Hoskins narrowed it down to Nigeria, likely Yoruba because Yoruban men are commonly circumcised shortly after birth like Adam was. Many Yorubans believe in a god called Olorun, also called Olodumare. Deities known as Orishas help bridge the gap between Earth and Olorun, with many Yorubans believing that there are hundreds of Orisha. All Orishas require sacrifice that focused on the Orisha's favorite color, plant, and food. Human offerings weren't encouraged, but there were still a minority of people within the religion that allegedly dealt with human sacrifices. According to Hoskins, the British police were uncomfortable with the term sacrifice, with some referring to it as the S word, and instead carried on their inquiries into Muti in South Africa. With no new evidence, and the appeals to the public not leading to anything concrete, a small group of Metropolitan Police officers traveled to South Africa to request help from former South African President Nelson Mandela. Mandela appealed for information about Adam's identity on television, which was broadcast all over Africa in various languages. Despite this widespread appeal, the police left the country with no new leads. It wasn't until a few months later, in July, that police finally had more evidence to work with. Professor Kenneth Pye, a forensic geologist at the Royal Holloway in London, had analyzed 3 parts of Adam's bones using isotope analysis. Strontium isotopes pass from rocks to the soil and water, which then gets absorbed by animals and plant life. This is then passed into humans, and so unique isotopes are found in human bones based on the geology and environment of where they were living. Professor Pye had developed a test that could reveal where a person had lived over the last 10 years of their life. And so it would help the police determine where Adam, being only 5 to 7 years old, had grown up. The issue that Pye had was that there was ample data for the western part of the world, but the data for everyone else wasn't a complete picture. The results of the test showed that Adam wasn't born in the UK or anywhere in Europe. Pye originally tested for South Africa, but that wasn't a match. They then looked at West Africa, which was confirmed to be a match. This was narrowed down even further to 3 potential areas, between Kano and Yos, the highlands towards Cameroon and Yoruba. According to Pye, the evidence pointed to Yoruba being the most likely area, but he requested soil, food, and animal samples in Yoruba to help conclusively prove it. A small team of investigators went to Nigeria to gain the requested samples. They also tested the carbon levels in Adam's bones, which showed that he could not have spent more than 6 months in the UK, with the estimated time being a lot shorter. Nick Branch, a pollen archaeologist, also concluded that the pollen found in Adam's small intestine could not have come from anywhere other than British or northwestern European trees, specifically the alder tree. The fact that it was found in the small intestine shows that he must have been in the UK for at least 3 days prior to his death. This meant that the police now knew that Adam had been in the UK anywhere between 3 days and 6 months. Test for what else was found in his intestines had not been analyzed at this point. Hoskins wanted to find out what it was because Adam would have likely been fed a potion to do with the ritual, which would help narrow down who performed this sacrifice and what deity it was for, and so the lengthy analysis of the contents of his intestines were ordered. In the meantime, by a stroke of luck, the police learned of a potential lead. Social services in Glasgow had contacted the police after social workers reported finding suspicious items in a Nigerian woman's home, such as a jar filled with chicken feathers. According to the social workers, when her 2 young children had been removed from her home and placed into care, the woman claimed that she needed them back urgently so that she could perform a ritual with them. This woman's name was Joyce Osagede. There is very little information known about Joyce Osagede. It is believed that she was born in Nigeria, although on her immigration documents she had stated that she was from Sierra Leone. The police believe that this was done due to a common belief that people from Sierra Leone were more likely to be granted a visa into the UK. On a fake passport, which had her picture but a false name, Joyce's date of birth was listed as June 14th, 1971, but there is no proof that this was her actual birth date. Police questioned Joyce on 2 occasions in July at her home in Glasgow. Francisco, and both times she gave permission for police to search the flat. An officer named Joe Veal had noticed a letter bearing a London address on the second visit. She had memorized it, and the police went to visit the address later on, which housed a Nigerian woman and her family. The woman denied knowing Joyce, but did recognize her picture. According to this woman, Joyce had appeared at her door and asked to see a priest. When pressed for more details, the woman remembered Joyce saying that she'd recently been in Germany, the same country where Adam's shorts were from. Because of this, police decided to raid Joyce's home to see if she'd hidden anything of importance from them. As a result of the search, they found hidden clothing that had washing instructions in German with the tag saying Kids and Company, which matched the tag found on Adam's shorts. Some news outlets reported that orange shorts were also found there that matched Adam's, but this is false. When questioned about the shorts, Joyce said that she'd bought them from Woolworths in Germany. Joyce was then arrested. According to her interview, Joyce said that she'd lived with her estranged husband in Germany until mid-2001. She had then fled to London with her daughters because she was concerned for their safety. When pressed, she said that her husband was the head of a cult named the Black Coat Eyes of the Devil Guru Maharaj, who she claimed were involved with human sacrifice. Joyce said that her husband was personally responsible for the deaths of 10 children, including their firstborn child back in 1995. When police tried to question her further about her husband, she was unwilling to give them any specific details. She originally said his name was Ono Jaiovi, but wrote down the name Tony Onus when given a pen and asked to spell it. After that, she refused to say any more. She denied saying the name Ono Jainovi, and changed her story to her coming straight to Britain from Lagos by ship. According to the police, Joyce seemed very afraid. She also denied knowing Adam and said that she hadn't taken care of any young boys while living in Germany. DNA proved that she wasn't related to Adam, and later on she was released from custody. The police were eager to track down her estranged husband, but they had very little information to go off of. The one interesting piece of information that Joyce mentioned was the cult, the Black Coat Eyes of the Devil Guru Maharaj. The cult was inspired by a movement from India called Divine Light Mission, which was founded by Guru Hansji Maharaj in the 1960s. The Divine Light Mission, or DLM, focused on finding inner peace through meditation. The members meditated twice a day and attended meetings. It has been referred to as a mix between Hindu teachings and Western philosophy. At its core, DLM was underpinned by 5 commandments. Do not put off until tomorrow what you can do today. Constantly meditate and remember the holy name. Leave no room for doubt in the mind. Never delay attending meditation, and always have faith in God. The Black Coat Eyes of the Devil Guru Maharaj was a group that initially called themselves DLM to legitimize their cause. The cult was started by a man called Muhammad Saeed. Saeed was born in Ghana in the 1950s, but moved to Yorubaland when he was in his 20s. Saeed then traveled to London illegally in 1975, after enrolling in a course at the Institute of Marketing. It was while in London that he encountered the teachings of Maharaj Ji in the DLM. Saeed then returned to Nigeria in 1980, where he declared himself the rightful Maharaj Ji. Most Nigerians ignored him, but a small number of followers, mostly Yoruban, believed him. The group was ostracized from DLM International, and so Saeed set up his own group, with interchangeable names such as Divine Light Mission, Elon Vital, and variations on the theme of Guru Maharaj, such as the Black Coat Eyes of the Devil Guru Maharaj. The most common name was One Love Family. Muhammad Saeed was called Guru, Black Jesus, and Perfect Living Master by his followers. Their sacred color was bright orange, with Saeed wearing orange robes. They had almost 30 cult compounds around Nigeria, and there had been complaints and rumors of torture and murders, including a Ghanaian man in 1991 after he went to one to find his sister who had been allegedly held captive for years. With the sacred color of the cult being orange, and the locations being near Adam's alleged birthplace, it made for many interesting connections to this cult. However, the police still had nothing concrete, and they could not get any more information out of Joyce Osagede. In September 2002, a year after Adam's body was found, a memorial service took place at the Great London Authority offices near the Southwark Bridge. Police hoped that the service would help to remind the public about the brutal crime, which was still unsolved. They also reminded the public of the £50,000 reward, which was still active. Once the service was over, police officers cast a wreath into the Thames in memory of Adam. In September of 2002, 1 year after the discovery of Adam's body, an analysis was performed on the contents of his intestines, and some intriguing discoveries were made. There were clay pellets found, which likely came from a river in West Africa. There was also ground up bone, although it was impossible to determine if it was animal or human in nature, as well as some unknown plant material. The traces of carbon and tin suggested that the mixture was burned down in a container first. According to Hoskins, mixtures made before human sacrifices were ground up together before being burned down in a container on an open flame, before being given to the victim, usually between 24 to 48 hours before death. Due to the lumpy texture of the potion, it was theorized that cough medicine had been used to help the potion go down easier, rather than due to Adam being unwell. In mid-October of 2002, Joyce's 2 London flats, one in South London and one in the East End, were searched for potential evidence. At the address in East End, they found that the occupant whose name was on the lease was a man called Kingsley Ojo, but he was gone and nothing else was found at the address that was significant. But at the South London flat, a more significant discovery was made. The police found forged travel documents and tickets, as well as Nigerian and British passports. One of the passports had a birth date of June 14, 1971, and inside had a picture of Joyce. The names on the other documents that were found were names not recognized by police. They also found a video titled The Wedding of Joyce Ariabere to Samuel. They also found a video titled The Wedding of Joyce Ariabere to Samuel Onojayovi, which was dated February of 1997. In the wedding video, a live goat was sacrificed on an altar in an offering to the gods. Police recognized the name Onojayovi as the one that Joyce had originally said in her police interview, and so they wondered if this was her estranged husband. They found nothing in the British police records, so they searched for the name Samuel Onojayovi in the European Union Agency for Law Enforcement Cooperation database, also known as Europol. They discovered that he was a wanted man in Germany, where he lived under the alias of Ibrahim Kadade. He was wanted for a number of offenses, including forgery of documents and human trafficking. He had jumped bail and had been sentenced in his absence to 7 years in prison. According to German detectives, Joyce had also lived under an alias in Hamburg while living there, Bintu Kadade. With this new information, the Met Police began to look into Samuel Onojayovi. He was a man who, according to his estranged wife, practiced human sacrifices on children. The cult he was a part of used the color bright orange in their worship, and he had lived in the country where Adam's orange shorts had been purchased. Add to this his charges of human trafficking, and it seemed as though police were finally getting closer to finding out what had happened to Adam. However, research into both the names Samuel Onojayovi and Ibrahim Kadade led nowhere. If Samuel was still in the UK, he was likely living under another alias. The investigation was dealt another blow in December of 2002, when the Home Office concluded that Joyce Osagede had not followed the official asylum channels, and so was set to be deported while her 2 children remained in foster care. Met Police argued that she was an important part of their investigation, and so she needed to stay in the UK until their inquiries were finished. But the Home Office gave them 2 choices. Either Joyce was to be charged with a crime or deported. At this point, police did not have any concrete evidence that Joyce had committed any crimes, so they had to watch as their only witness was deported back to Nigeria. The timing for Joyce's deportation could not have been worse. Within days of her deportation, German social services revealed more information about Joyce, or, as she went by in Germany, Bintu Kadade. She had arrived in Germany via Italy in 1992, a year after her partner, Ibrahim Kadade, the alias of Samuel Onojayovi. Their 2 daughters had been born in Germany in 1997 and 1999. 1989. Their first child, a son, was reported dead in 1995, which matched the year that Joyce had said her son was sacrificed by Samuel. The two daughters had briefly attended a nursery near Hamburg in September of 2001. British detectives went to Germany to interview nursery staff. The girls had only been at the nursery for a few weeks, but a local German woman called Frau Dibbern had fostered both girls for a little while. Frau Dibbern and her family all remembered one detail about the oldest daughter when they'd last seen her in September of 2001. She had been wearing bright orange shorts. This tangible link to Adam was vital for police, but they had no way of questioning Joyce about it now that she was in Nigeria. All they could do was continue to look for her estranged husband and any other potential leads. A few weeks later, towards the end of 2002, police were finally able to track down Kingsley Ojo, the man whose name had been on the lease at Joyce's East End address. Apparently, Ojo had fled the flat as soon as Joyce had been arrested. He had then stayed at Quested Court, Brett Road, in the East End, under the name of Musa Kamara. The officers arrived at this address with a search warrant, but the flat was empty. However, the stove was still warm and there were unwashed dishes in the sink, as well as a bedroom window being wide open. It was determined that Ojo had likely fled moments before they arrived. The flat was searched, and a video labeled Ritual was found. The video involved the beheading of a man as a sacrificial offering to a Yoruban deity to help speed up the recovery of an elder from a serious illness. Police could not determine if the video was real or fake. Various forged documents and 2 small packets of an unknown sandy substance were also found, which were sent off for further analysis. After subsequent inquiries, police were able to finally track down Ojo and he was arrested. Very little is publicly known about Kingsley Ojo, other than he allegedly came to London from Nigeria in 1997 and was born sometime in 1969 or 1970. During his interviews with police, Ojo claimed that another person rented his bedroom out and that the items found within were not his. He also claimed to have never heard of Joyce before, despite her name and number being stored in his phone. They determined that Kingsley Ojo was from Benin City in Yoruba. Ojo was eventually released without charge, but was secretly followed by the police to see if his movements led to more information. They had microphones fitted in his car, phone, and his flat. Also in December 2002, the results for the analysis on the samples that were collected in Yoruba came back, which concluded that Adam had spent most of his short life living in the suburbs of Benin City. This was the same city that Joyce Osagede, Samuel Onojayovi, and Kingsley Ojo were all from. The 2 small packages found in Ojo's flat were found to be incredibly similar to the contents found in Adam's intestines, with the quartz grains found being from the same river in Nigeria. 2003 started off with more useful information for the investigators. Operation Maxim, a human trafficking surveillance unit, had been following Kingsley Ojo since he was released from custody. They were both pleased and also amazed that Ojo immediately went back to his illegal activities, despite having just recently been arrested by the police. He would talk openly on the phone about what he was doing, and he was regularly visiting various other criminals at their addresses. It helped this unit pinpoint who was a part of the large-scale human trafficking ring involving Nigeria, Germany, and the UK. The Met Police also had another bit of luck themselves, after showing a Nigerian man, who had been arrested on unrelated charges, a photo of Samuel Onojayovi. He was able to give the police the information they desperately needed, the whereabouts of Samuel, who was a wanted man living in Dublin under an alias. Investigators contacted the Irish Garda, who were able to match up the details with a man who had come to Ireland in 2001. Samuel had come into the country with a woman he claimed was his wife, who was heavily pregnant at the time. She gave birth to their child in Cork, Ireland in autumn of 2001. Although the police now knew where Samuel lived, they decided to use surveillance on him first to see if they could find out anything incriminating. Now that they had tracked down both Kingsley Ojo and Samuel Onojayovi, the investigators wanted to speak to Joyce Osagede again. In February of 2003, they requested that Joyce be returned to the UK for questioning. Nigerian authorities were unable to track down Joyce, so So a small team of British police officers traveled to Benin City to assist. They then heard from the British High Commission in Lagos that a woman using the surname Osagede wanted an appointment to request news of her children, who were still in Scotland. When Joyce arrived for the appointment, the Nigerian police arrested her and took her in for questioning. According to her statement, Joyce had been a member of the Guru Maharaj cult from the years 1994 to 2002, and she left because there was, quote, too much evil, unquote. She said that the cult practiced juju, or black sorcery, but was too afraid to give any more details. There were worshippers in Germany and London, and her husband was a messiah in the cult, and she had been an organizer. When she repeated her claim that her husband had murdered children, police asked about Adam. Originally, she said, "I do not know anything about the murder of the child in London," but then later stated, "I know the child was murdered in Lewisham. I don't know where the head and limbs are. I think the boy was sacrificed because his parents had been brainwashed by Maharajji's teachings." Joyce also confirmed that she had bought the orange shorts from Germany. When asked where the shorts were now, she said she'd given them to her friend before saying she must have left them at her flat in Germany. Her former flat in Germany had been searched, and by luck, it had not been rented to anyone else, and so it was exactly as she had left it. No shorts were found. When this was mentioned to her, she said she must have taken them with her to Glasgow, but none were found there either. She could not explain where the shorts were, and why Adam was wearing shorts that matched. However, Joyce could not be charged because she had committed no crimes in Nigeria, and her only crime in the UK that could be proven had to do with immigration, which she had already been deported for. After the interview, Joyce was released once again. British police were disappointed, but felt as though the pieces were finally starting to come together. Despite this, nothing new happened in the case for another 4 months, until June of 2003. In a joint operation, the Met Police and the Irish Garda raided the Dublin home of Samuel Onojayovi and the woman claiming to be his wife. Their home was searched extensively, although there are no reports of whether anything of importance was found. During his interviews with police, Samuel denied everything. He claimed to not know who Kingsley Ojo was, despite having the man's details in his diary. Strangely, Samuel also denied knowing Joyce Osagede, even though they were still married. The German authorities began extradition proceedings. 2 weeks later, over 200 police officers took part in a series of raids on 9 addresses throughout London. 21 people, 10 men and 11 women, were arrested on suspicion of human trafficking as well as immigration and passport offenses. 2 more were arrested the next day. 19 of these people were found to have direct links to Benin City in Nigeria. Their premises were all searched, and hundreds of suspicious items were taken, including various herbs, animal bones with nails through them, and dried organic matter. Most were eventually deported back to Nigeria after questioning, with some being charged and sent to prison for varying sentences. At the same time, Kingsley Ojo was picked up by a joint force of Italian and British police after he was followed to an underage brothel in Brescia, Italy. This brothel acted as a transit hub for youngsters he helped smuggle into Europe. Some young people got no further than the brothel and had been forced to work there as sex slaves. Ojo was flown back to London and taken to the Shooters Hill police station. 2 Nigerian girls, who had been freed as a result of the raids, talked about their experience in Benin City. According to the girls, they had been initiated into a cult in a chamber covered in bright orange cloth, where they'd been forced to drink potions and told that they would die if they ever broke the vow of secrecy to which they had been sworn. They had to obey whatever they were told, which involved sexual slavery. The police learned that Ojo was high up in the human trafficking ring, and they hoped to prove that he was the man who had trafficked Adam into the UK almost 3 years prior. The final piece of evidence for the case in 2003 was the analysis of the previously unidentified plant material found in Adam's small intestine. They had originally concluded that it wasn't possible to identify it, but the material was then sent to another expert. This individual discovered that it was the Calabar bean, also known as the ordeal bean. Native to Africa, the Calabar bean is highly poisonous. The fact that it was found in Adam's small intestine suggested that he'd ingested it and survived, and therefore it must have been a small dose. In small doses, the bean was found to completely paralyze the victim. It kept them conscious, but unable to move. It showed that the perpetrators of this brutal crime wanted Adam to be completely helpless. Despite making all of this progress, the case would end up stalling for the better part of a year. On July 10th, 2004, the trial of Kingsley Ojo finally started. However, there was a major issue at the very beginning. Despite the case taking over a year to get to trial, the various departments and police forces involved led to communication issues, and some court documents had not been served until a week before the trial was due to start. This meant that it was too late for certain things to be admitted into evidence. Both the police and prosecution were concerned that the trial would end with an acquittal. Despite this, Ojo's solicitors believed that the Crown had enough to prosecute and therefore offered a plea deal. Kingsley Ojo would plead guilty to some charges if others were dropped. The prosecution agreed. Trafficking and immigration charges were eventually read out in court, with Kingsley Ojo pleading guilty. He was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison, with the judge recommending that he be deported back to Nigeria after his sentence was served. This was a victory, and a major player in a human trafficking ring was behind bars. Yet, investigators were still no closer to solving Adam's murder. The case eventually went cold. The police could not bring Joyce Osagede to the UK, and all they had on Samuel Onojayovi was Joyce's word that he was a part of a cult that killed children. They had no concrete evidence that he had anything to do with Adam's death. In August of 2005, police buried Adam in an unmarked grave in Southwark Cemetery, approximately 1 mile from where his body was found in the Thames almost 4 years prior. This service wasn't announced to the media, and instead only prominent members of the investigation were invited. In 2007, police decided to secure an early release for Kingsley Ojo. They believed that he wasn't involved in Adam's death, but they suspected he'd been involved in the trafficking and so likely knew the actual killers. Ojo agreed to assist by going undercover, but he gave them false information for over a year before disappearing in Africa, never to be seen by police ever again. A year later, in the spring of 2008, Nigerian police agreed to track down Joyce Osagede. Under caution, she admitted that she'd looked after the boy known as Adam and that she had dressed him in orange shorts that had belonged to one of her daughters. According to author Richard Hoskins, the results of this interview led to a potential new witness in Germany, but this lead did not go anywhere. There's no public record of what this lead might have been. Ronka Phillips, an ITV News reporter and journalist of Nigerian descent, said that at around this time, she was contacted by Joyce's brother, Victor, who said that his sister was willing to be interviewed. According to an article written by her in April of 2011, Phillips traveled to Lagos, Nigeria with British detectives to speak to Joyce. However, when they arrived, they were told by the Nigerian police that Joyce was suffering from severe mental health problems, and that they advised against any interviews. Both Phillips and the British police returned to the UK disappointed. According to Phillips, she believed that Joyce Osagede was the key to solving Adam's murder. Later in 2011, Phillips was able to track down Joyce via her brother once again. Joyce was in poor physical and mental health, with her brother Victor looking after her. In the interview with Ronka Phillips, Joyce confessed to bringing Adam from Germany to the UK after the boy had stayed with her for a time. She said that his name was Ikpomwosa, and that she'd given him to a man she called Bawa. When Joyce had traveled to London a few weeks later, she was told that the boy was dead. Joyce said they used him for a ritual in the water. Joyce had a photograph of a black boy standing next to her 2 daughters. In the photo, the young boy had large brown eyes and was wearing a blue buttoned-up jacket. When asked if the boy in the photo was Adam, Joyce said that it was. This interview reignited the media's interest in the case, and they began to claim that the mystery of Adam's identity had been solved. The Met Police were interested in the new information, but they were unwilling to believe Joyce and her confession because of her poor mental health and the fact that she was heavily medicated at the time of the interview. It is unknown if police looked into this lead or not, but over a year later, in 2013, the BBC interviewed Joyce again. Nick Chalmers, the detective chief inspector that had worked on Adam's case but had since retired, traveled with the BBC for the interview. Joyce now said that Adam's real name was Patrick Arabor, and that he was not the boy in the photograph. According to Joyce, the name Ikpamwosa and saying the photograph was Adam had just been a misunderstanding. The photograph was actually of a boy called Danny, who was the son of a former friend of Joyce's. She also revealed that the man she had called Bawa was actually Kingsley Ojo, the human trafficker that had been convicted back in 2004. Nick Chalmers stated, "I've always suspected his involvement, and now for the first time, we have a witness who is saying categorically Kingsley was involved." Kingsley Ojo was apparently later found in Nigeria, but refused to speak to either the BBC or British police. After this interview, the BBC tracked down Danny in Germany, who confirmed that the photograph was of him as a child. They also visited Joyce's old flat near Hamburg, where an unnamed man said that he remembered seeing Adam there. In an interview with the BBC, this man said, "The boy was running around. He was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and he was jumping all over this couch that they had and drawing on it." And that was the most recent update on the murder of Adam. Since 2013, there has been no movement in the investigation, at least not publicly. Joyce Osagede hasn't revealed any more information, and there has been nothing said about Kingsley Ojo. There have also been no updates on Samuel Onojayovi since Germany extradited him, although presumably he served his 7 years in prison for human trafficking and other offenses. Most tragically of all, there have been no signs that Adam's identity has been discovered. It is unknown if his name really was Patrick Erebor, or if that was just another piece of false information given to the police by Joyce. It is likely that the Met Police are still continuing their investigation, although there have been no official updates from them in over 7 years. The police seem to know who it was, or at least some of the people involved, but the overall lack of evidence has hindered them. That, and the major players living across the world, has made their investigation a lot more difficult than usual. The investigation itself has led to a number of criticisms of the police. One of the biggest criticisms in the press has been the police's focus on South Africa, despite numerous experts stating that Adam and the culprits were likely from West Africa. This blinkered approach led to the use of taxpayers' money being used to fly the investigators down to South Africa to speak to Nelson Mandela, which ultimately led to no new information. Furthermore, the officers had also ensured that Kingsley Ojo, a confirmed human trafficker that ran an underage brothel, was released early so that they could gain potential information. Yet, he did not provide police with any new evidence, and they eventually lost track of him in Africa, which critics consider to be an act of incompetence by the police. Investigators had also caused controversy by stating that the African community were not helping their investigation and were refusing to cooperate. Trust between the police and the African community in London had been shattered as a result of the racially motivated murder of Stephen Lawrence in southeast London in April of 1994. Various issues from the case had caused a lack of faith in the police, and this was highlighted in the McPherson report in 1998. In the report, it said that the investigation into the death of Stephen Lawrence was, quote, marred by a combination of professional incompetence, institutional racism, and a failure of leadership. Unquote. For the African community, this showed what they had believed for a long time, that police could not be trusted. Because of this, communication between the two had broken down, and has arguably not been repaired to this day. The one aspect of this case that has been applauded over the years, however, is the use of forensics. The isotope analysis and analyses of the small intestine content has been discussed in numerous scientific journals, with the information provided going on to further the works of other forensic scientists. However, it wasn't just issues with the police that caused controversy. The media also played a significant role in that. The police utilized the media throughout the early stages of their investigation, from requesting help from the public to using beloved figures such as Nelson Mandela. Yet, as the investigation went on, the media began to use the evidence from the Adam investigation to fearmonger. Newspapers, such as The Guardian, ran an article in November of 2002 after receiving word that police officers involved in the investigation behind Adam's murder were seen at an environmental health raid of a London shop that was reportedly selling bushmeat, or exotic meat that is illegally brought into the country. There had been a tip-off that human flesh was being sold there with links to human trafficking. No human remains were found, and yet the media used this story to further push the idea that human sacrifice was on the rise in the UK. Terms such as African voodoo magic and African religious sacrifice were used on a regular basis in articles about Adam, with no explanation of it being seen in only a minority of worshippers. Another popular quote that the media liked to use was from Hendrik Schultz, the South African expert who performed a second post-mortem on Adam and incorrectly concluded that it was a result of Muti murder. According to Dr. Schultz, quote, "As these communities grow, elements of African culture will be inevitably transported to Britain," unquote. This was used to spread the fear that human sacrifices were going to become a more common problem in a multicultural Britain. According to Richard Hoskins in his book, he'd received several threats, including threats against his life, as a result of the way Yorubans and other Africans were described in the media. In a case unrelated to Adam, it was revealed in a leaked Metropolitan Police report that 300 African children had disappeared from school registers around London. The police stated that it was mostly as a result of administrative issues or people moving, and yet the media had taken it as proof that the children were being sacrificed. Articles with headlines such as "Children sacrificed in London churches," say police, from the London Evening Times in June of 2005 were common, and Adam was mentioned in more than one article as proof that this was the fate of these missing African children. Debbie Ario, the director of an organization called Africans Unite Against Child Abuse, said, in relation to the media's focus on fearmongering and causing moral panic, that it was about stigmatizing, criminalizing, and demonizing the African community rather than protecting children. The police responded to the uproar over the leaked report by stating, quote, "African communities do not tolerate the abuse of children any more than any other community," unquote. But this did not stop the media from speculating. An article in 2003 by Todd Sanders, titled "Imagining the Dark Continent, the Met, the Media, and the Thames Torso," summarizes it with, "Contrary to their stated aims and objectives, the police and media have reproduced a much older and much more unsettling story of African otherness. And yet, after 2013, the media lost all interest in Adam's story. It's only mentioned in articles with taglines such as "Stories to Keep You Up at Night," including an article in My London titled "The Unsolved Case of the Torso in the Thames That Will Keep You Awake at Night," as though it was nothing more than a scary ghost story to tell others at a campfire. The real story of Adam seems to have been forgotten. A young child was brutally murdered nearly 19 years ago, and yet the country seems to have moved on. It's a case that most people would not recognize, particularly those outside of London. Adam isn't a household name like Madeleine McCann and James Bulger, even though they all involved a child. Instead, he is just another unsolved crime in England's capital city. September 21st, 2021 will be the 20-year anniversary of Adam's torso being found floating in the River Thames. There has been no news as to whether a memorial will take place yet, although it seems likely due to the unfortunate milestone. The Metropolitan Police were able to utilize the evidence to track down everything, from where he was brought up to what he last ate, and approximately how long he had been in the UK. And yet, his identity and those of his killers remain unknown. There is evidence, but not enough to convict anyone. Unless someone else comes forward, or a confession is made, the story of Adam, the torso in the Thames, will likely remain unresolved.